Good afternoon and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland and this week's Full Scottish. My name is Isla Barker. This week, on the programme this week, we are delighted to be joined by David Spacey from Believe in Scotland. Good afternoon, David.
Good afternoon, Isla.
Yes, and we are also delighted to welcome Maureen Watt, who is the president of the SNP. Good afternoon, Maureen.
Good afternoon, Isla and David.
So to start, we will begin with our Ukraine update on day 1495 of the war. So Qatar and Ukraine signed a defence agreement on Saturday that included a cooperation on countering threats from missiles and drones. Earlier on Saturday, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky, during a previously unannounced flurry of visits to Gulf nations, said his country and the United Arab Emirates had agreed to cooperate on defence after Iran targeted countries in the area in retaliation for US-Israeli strikes. Ukraine also signed an air defence agreement with Saudi Arabia during Zelensky's visit to the kingdom earlier this week. At a media briefing, President Zelensky told reporters, "We are talking about a 10-year cooperation. We have already signed a relevant agreement with Saudi Arabia. We have just signed a similar agreement with Qatar. Also for 10 years, we will sign one with the Emirates." In return for its aid to Gulf countries, Ukraine is seeking more high-end air defence missiles that they possess, and Kyiv needs to counter Russia's attacks. Last week, Zelensky said that Ukraine was looking into whether it could play a role in restoring security in the Strait of Hormuz. Zelensky has sought to craft an opportunity from the war, which otherwise benefits Russia through higher oil prices and possible slowdowns in Western arms supplies to Kyiv. He began offering US allies in the region deals to get their hands on Ukrainian drone interceptors, and has dispatched more than 200 military experts since the Iran war started. Early on Saturday, Russian air attacks across Ukraine killed at least 4 people and damaged critical infrastructure, including a port and a maternity hospital, authorities said. Iran claims it struck a Ukraine-related drone warehouse in Dubai. In a news briefing, Ukraine's foreign ministry spokesperson Hyorohi Tiaki, however, called the Iranian allegations a lie. Ukraine's military struck a major Russian oil refinery in Yaroslavl, northeast of Moscow, in an overnight attack. The Ukrainian General Staff said on Saturday. It said in a statement that the attack caused a fire at the site of the refinery, which is critical for the Russian army's logistics. So the proposed deal between Ukraine and Saudi Arabia, I believe, was 10 years. Do either of you think that this conflict could continue for another 10 years?
Well, honestly, who knows? I mean, anybody who would make a prediction about it is a brave person to do that. I mean, what is really worrying is whether the two conflicts might come together into a third world war. Clearly, because of where the weapons are coming from, it's all very interlinked and, in my view, very worrying. Hopefully, I mean, I can't imagine that Donald Trump would want a conflict between Israel, the US, and Iran to go on for long. Although, there are troops, US troops amassing in the region. So, you try and read lots of things to get a handle on this, but it's all very conflicting.
Yes. David, do you have anything to say?
Well, I'm no expert on these matters, but it seems to me the war will probably continue until Putin leaves the Kremlin, which is only likely to happen at the end of his life. He's going to leave that building in a box. There's nobody looking to depose him. And he can't afford to back down on this. He absolutely can't afford to back down. So he will continue to slaughter his own, sacrifice his own people's lives in the pursuit of trying to Russify eastern Ukraine for the rest of his life.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and so it is quite concerning and obviously hard to predict, similar to the Iran war. There's so much changing at the same time, and everyone's been quite inconsistent. We don't know what to believe. So moving on to the Middle East update. As 6 more Palestinians are killed in Gaza, the total number of people killed since the start of the October 2025 ceasefire has risen to 698. In Lebanon, Israel has been accused of war crimes after 3 journalists, Ali Shoaib, Fatima Fatouni and Mohammed Fatouni were killed when the IDF targeted their car. Despite Trump saying talks were ongoing, the attacks on Iran by Israel and the United States continued, and the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. Is US preparing to invade Iran? I mean, Trump has been saying that there have been talks between the United States and Iran, but Iran has been vague and saying that either these talks are not happening or it has been exaggerated. So how do you think, let's start with David, how do you think we can find information on this that is actually accurate? Is there even a possibility of that? I mean, there's an internet blackout in Iran, so it's hard to find personal accounts from people experiencing this.
Well, I think there's a great deal of noise in the system, most of it generated, I have to say, by the US. And it's just astonishing. I don't have the words for it. I've lived my entire life with America being the so-called leader of the Western world and a beacon of freedom and democracy and of truth and justice. And here we are. I'm more inclined to trust what the Ayatollah in Iran says than I am what the president of the USA says. You just cannot tell the truth. But the one thing I think that is most significant in the last week is the movement of troops, of US troops, paratroopers and Marines, to the Middle East theatre by the thousands.
Yeah.
And you know, why would you do that if you didn't have an intention to put boots on the ground? So, I mean, long ago I started ignoring what Donald Trump said because, you know, what he says in the morning, he changes in the afternoon and he changes again in the evening. You can't believe a single word the man says. You need to watch the actions, not the words, is what I'd say.
Okay, and Maureen, what do you think of all of this? Who do you think we can trust in this situation? Do you have any predictions on the continuation of this conflict?
Well, I think I agree with what David said. You simply cannot trust Trump. I mean, I listened to him at a rally during this week. I think it was Wednesday or Thursday. And I mean, the man is completely deranged. He just goes off on a tangent at every single stage. And then he maybe sees a couple of words on a teleprompter, reads them, and then he goes off at something else. So he simply cannot be trusted. I don't think we should underestimate, though, the influence that Netanyahu has on Trump.
Yeah.
And Israel and Netanyahu are determined to rid the world of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. And as long as they feel that they are under threat in Israel, they will continue, and they have the backing of Trump. As far as Iran is concerned, I think we need to remember that there were talks ongoing before Trump invaded Iran or started bombing Iran in Geneva, I think it is. And maybe these talks are still ongoing, and we haven't heard much from Pakistan confirming or denying that they are negotiators. Clearly, lots of countries want peace because of the huge effect that it has on oil prices throughout the world. And not just oil prices, but the problem about getting fertilizer, which is probably greater or as important as oil. I don't think we should forget that. So Trump's got himself in a real mess. I don't know how he can withdraw from the conflict properly. Clearly, has in so many wars, nobody has thought through to the end game and what they want to do with the countries that are invading, or who they want to lead them, or any sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Any word of reconstruction and putting in place democratic principles and democratic authorities. And that's what annoys me so much about men leading things, that they never ever think of the aftermath. I mean, we've seen it in Libya, we've seen it in Iraq, we've seen it in Afghanistan, so many places where bombing is fine and we get rid of them for a while, and then they resurge, but there's been no democratic systems put in place. So this is yet another one.
So, do you think the delay in movement of fertilizer might either push European countries, including the UK, to adopt more organic practices, or do you think it's going to push food prices up even further? David?
Well, I think both of those things will happen. But what's also clearly happening, and quite rightly, is that Europe is insulating and decoupling itself from a, you know an America led by a mad king, and quite rightly so.
So, do you
I
think
agree.
that? Yes.
Sorry.
No, no.
Yeah, as a
Laura,
farmer's
please.
daughter, yeah, I think there will be less fertilizer used, which in many ways is a good thing. And trying to reduce the amount of artificial fertilizer that's used is a good thing. Um, but whether they go, fully organic is something that's probably not going to happen in the short term because it's very, very expensive. Um, but yes, and I also think that it's confirmed that the policy in Scotland of trying to get away from oil and dependency on oil and increase the amount of renewables is seen to be right. And I hope other countries are going to do that as well. Clearly, we're going to need oil and gas for quite some time until that transition happens. But nevertheless, I think it's shown more and more starkly that we need to get off oil and uh, relying on oil from unstable countries where, even the fact that they didn't look to see that the oil tankers would be stuck in the Strait of Hormuz and see that pipelines were there. I mean, it's just so incredibly naive.
Yeah, amateur hour.
Yes, of course.
Mm.
So, moving on to the No Kings protests. So, millions of people turned out across America at No Kings protests, led by Robert De Niro in New York and Bruce Springsteen in Minnesota among the protesters. From tariffs to threats to take Greenland, the attack on Venezuela, the war in Iran, to the blockade of Cuba, is Trump trying to use the US military to fight private wars for profit? And Trump has withdrawn the United States from international organizations like the World Health Organization, has undermined the UN in Gaza, and has created splits in NATO. So, do you think there's any way that the EU can help Cuba during this time? I mean, mothers are giving birth in total darkness because of power cuts. Cars were queuing for hours outside of petrol stations before the Iran war, and ATMs regularly run out of cash in a very cash-based society. So, David, do you think there's any way that the EU can step in to help Cuba while this blockade is ongoing, or would diplomatic ties not allow that?
Well, I'm not sure that Europe really has the legs to do that. I mean, the EU is not a particularly internationally interventionist organization. I mean, it's very, very effective at acting in the interests of its members, extraordinarily effective. But it doesn't have a big record of consistent foreign policy, for example. That's still very much a developing field for the EU. So I'm not convinced we're going to see intervention led by the EU in the Caribbean or in Cuba, particularly. I think that's a very long shot, I have to say. But the answer to your question is Trump destabilizing the world. Well, yes, of course he is.
And do you think that Trump will invade Cuba like he has with Iran, or are you not sure if you can say?
Um, well, leaders are leaders like air power, right? They like dropping bombs. They like drone warfare from a distance, but they don't like welcoming caskets home. They don't like prices going up. They don't like all the downsides of warfare. Um, And Trump, I think, is a deeply, deeply stupid man. But you've got to assume he's learned something. He must have learned something from this debacle with Iran. When I think he was drunk on hubris after the Venezuelan special forces grab of Maduro and thought he could engineer something similar in Iran. Well, he hasn't. He's just deepened the regime's roots, made it even more committed. He's convinced a new generation of Iranians that America is the great Satan. Um, I could go on, but you have to assume he's learned something. Although the man always surprises, never fails to surprise. So it's always possible, I guess.
I suppose we'll just have to see, or hopefully not see, in better words. So, Maureen, do you think that in the situation of independence, there's any way that the SNP could help with Iran? So how would the SNP help people with their bills or with diplomacy? What do you think Scotland's role in this conflict could be?
Well, just to follow on from what David said, we've got to realise that Trump thrives on creating chaos, and in the meantime, he's making sure that the wealth and the money goes to his billionaire pals. I mean, we saw that with the possible fixing of oil prices, or making money out of the volatility in the oil price. In terms of Cuba, I think that's more difficult. I'm not sure that anybody can get through to Trump, but one of the interesting things is that I think that JD Vance is not totally on board with what's happening at the moment. I think Trump and Hesketh are leading as the warmongers, and hopefully there are others who are beginning to realise that this is not in the long-term interests of the people of the United States, and they need to be extricating themselves from these things. In fact, in terms of Cuba, it's difficult to know what will happen. I agree that the EU can't get involved because the EU has, and the coalition of the willing, has had to take over the lead in fighting Russia in Ukraine, and clearly can't dilute the scarce resources that there are there. So I think Cuba is something that, I haven't given a lot of thought to be honest, and I'm sure we'll come back to discuss it on your programme. And sorry, in terms of the question about Scotland's role, Scotland and the SNP in the past has helped with negotiations in the Balkans, for example. I think we take our lead from Norway, where many years ago, I can't give you the dates, I remember that Norway managed to broker a deal in the Middle East, and it was almost to fruition, and then the big boys came in and just ruined it all. So I think there is a role for smaller countries with good negotiators to do it the quiet diplomacy, and I think that would be a role that Scotland would want to play in the world stage on independence.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to big tech. So after a court in Los Angeles found Meta and YouTube liable for deliberately designing addictive products in a landmark ruling this week, are we likely to see more bans on children's access to social media? Is regulation more urgent as AI becomes more embedded in technology as well? So the settlement, I believe, for this woman who sued Meta and YouTube was, I think it was £3 million coming to $6 million, if I have the numbers right there. So with Australia, for example, banning social media for under 16s, and I think England is experimenting with that as well. Do you think in Scotland, for example, Maureen, the SNP will bring in similar bans like this, or at least guidance to parents and schools?
Well, I think there already is guidance in schools. And, the SNP government gets blamed a lot for centralising things. And here is a clear example where we're saying teachers and schools and local authorities know best, and you do it your way. So whether it's collecting mobile phones or whatever, I mean, clearly tech is an integral part of learning now, whether it's on iPhones, whether it's on iPads, whether it's on laptops. We cannot get away from that. But where there is content that is clearly um, not beneficial for children, then in the first instance, it is up to parents, I think. But parents need to have clear guidance on what is harmful and what is not. And I don't think we're there yet. Just linking back to the previous two subjects, there's no way that the US government is going to take on big tech. Absolutely not. So it is going to be countries like Australia that take the lead on this. But there is harm clearly being done to our children, not just our children, to adults as well who spend far too much time on their phones, and I include myself in that. Although when I'm with my grandchildren, I'm absolutely sure I'm not on my phone. So, yeah, I think parents and everybody needs clearer guidance. I think it's really getting increasingly difficult to distinguish between what is a true thing on social media and what's AI generated for everybody, I think. And that is really worrying. I think, there can be fraudsters and scammers making big money out of that. And it does worry me, I have to say.
Thank you. And so, David, how do you think the Scottish government, or by extension, governments in Europe, could really start to crack down on big tech and make it less addictive, or hold these companies to account, because they do have a lot of power? For example, OpenAI. Oh yes. Well, as it is a reserved matter, do you think there is any way that Scotland could find some ground in the battle against big tech on its own, or with devolved powers?
Well, one of Scotland's great strengths is its tertiary education sector. Our universities are, second to none, really, and we have particular strengths in computer science and artificial intelligence. So we really should be leading the way, and I think the government could encourage universities to be researching the impact of social media on young brains. Personally, I respect what Maureen was saying about not centralising everything, but personally, I would follow the Australian example and just ban social media for under 16s. The human brain has been evolving over millions of years. Facebook has evolved over less than 20 years into a voracious consumer of our time and our cognitive ability. Another point I would make is the sheer strength of artificial intelligence in Scotland. This mechanism whereby Facebook and other platforms give you more of what you want, how they learn what you like and feed up in your feed, in your never ending scrolling feed, more material that you're going to want to consume. That's called reinforcement learning, because every time you like something, you reinforce the machine's knowledge of what you like. And that technique of reinforcement learning was invented by an academic called Donald Mickey, who was a university lecturer at the University of Edinburgh. He was a contemporary of Alan Turing at Bletchley Park and went back to academia after the war. And as soon as Edinburgh University got its first computer, he switched to computer science. So let's not underestimate Scotland's roots in this industry and our influence worldwide in artificial intelligence, but let's leverage it. Yes, lots of this stuff is reserved, but the government could be encouraging our academics, our universities to really, insert themselves in this debate and start establishing some facts about the interaction between young minds and the never-ending scroll of social media.
And so, with the Australian social media ban, there has been some debate against it, especially for children who are disabled or live in very rural communities where social interactions are quite limited, and social media really enabled connections with other people. So how do you think that a balance can be struck where children are not isolated, but they are also not addicted and overly reliant on social media or technology? Like so Maureen?
Yeah, I mean, what you were saying, David, was really interesting. And if we could say that Scotland was a country that was leading in AI for good, that would be something. One of the things that I was learning about this week was how fewer and fewer people are reading anything or at all, and how that can lead to instability in countries, which I found really interesting. And I think the fact that people are spending more time on social media and not reading is really, really worrying to me, and especially that our youngsters are not reading. I mean, we all know, I think, from our leaders who read or have read in the past how much better and more rounded they are than those who do not. And I think, to our credit, Nicola Sturgeon was one of those people. And we underestimate the power of reading and the good that it can do. So I think there has to be leadership from the top about um, getting a balance. And I think maybe this is a stage that we have to go through um, as we learn to use tech more wisely.
So, David, do you have an input on that?
Well, I mean, I take the point. It is easy to ban things, but I'm all in favour of free will, but adult informed free will. There's lots of things we don't allow under 16s to do. They can't smoke, they can't drink. There's a whole list. They can't vote. There's a whole list of things we don't allow under 16s to do. And I think given the immaturity, the fast developing, the way that social media is moving, we don't understand the impact this never-ending scroll has on the human brain. And I think there's some emerging evidence, I believe I'm right in saying there's some emerging evidence that it's bad for social skills. Well, that's a bad thing, full stop. I mean, we should be encouraging youngsters to go out to a youth club and mix and make friends and do new stuff rather than just staring at a screen. I mean, I think what Australia has done is good, and in general, I think it's absolutely obvious the American tech billionaires want untrammeled freedom to pump whatever content they wish into it through our eyeballs without any consequence, without any liability, without any responsibility for the impact that those words, those images have on the consumers. And that has to be stopped. Now, America's not going to do it, but the European Union is big enough, rich enough, powerful enough to establish AI regulation that does hold them to account. I mean, I was overjoyed by the decision in the Californian court. By the way, that's great. Let's not, okay, not everything that's happening in America is a total disaster. I think it's great that the courts took that move, but I'd like to see the European Union taking even more positive steps. Let's face it, they are the only regulator in the world, really, who has held these American tech billionaires to account and given, doled out very significant fines ranging up to the billions, which is the only kind of range of numbers that these tech billionaires respect or take account of. So more of that, please.
Yes. And so with youth clubs, as you mentioned, and then of course reading is greatly supported by libraries, there is also the question that the next government that is voted in after the election on the 7th of May must support councils, and councils themselves must support youth clubs and libraries as well to combat this greater power of big tech. I strongly believe in local action and global vision. So do you think the SNP is prepared to support youth clubs and libraries as well to aid in this, Maureen?
Well, I think it starts long before youth clubs. So we've got the baby box. There are books in there, some really good books, actually. My daughter in law thinks they're wonderful books. And then there are books given out at various stages. There are a lot of schools. I know of the ones in Dundee who use Dolly Parton's reading books and her wonderful rollout of reading in lots and lots of countries. Um, I pass a couple of libraries quite frequently, and notice when they've got their reading sessions. So I don't think we should think there's nothing happening at the moment. And in terms of youth clubs, excuse me, there is lots going on, but it does rely on parents to become leaders of such things and be the ones that help out. And often that is the reason why many things fail, like Girl Guide troops and things like that. So I don't think we should underestimate the amount of good work that goes on. There's street soccer in my old constituency, which was, run by the Robert Gordon University students throughout Aberdeen, and especially where the police found hot spots, they would go in. So I think there's a lot going on, but it's something that you should never, as a government and local authorities, take your eye off.
Of course. Thank you very much. So moving on to the Minyang investment in Scotland. So after the Scottish Parliament dissolved on Wednesday, the UK government announced it was blocking a 1.5 billion investment in Scotland by Chinese company Minyang, citing security concerns. Are there any similar concerns about Chinese investment in England? I mean, with other Chinese companies, for example, there are talks of a super embassy, Heathrow Airport, English power networks and battery sites and nuclear plants, all involving Chinese investment and connections to China. So what justification, if any, was there from the UK government in blocking this investment? Did they cite any security concerns? They did cite security concerns, but any specific ones? Did they have anything to back this up? Let's start with David.
Well, I can't answer that question directly. You'd have to ask the UK government. But to me, it seems ludicrous that you can have a security concern about an inert object like a turbine blade, but you don't have security concerns about a nuclear power plant or, the endless electronics, networked electronics that we're now reliant on, that are all, most of which are built in China. That simply doesn't make sense. And that there's a really strange dichotomy here that everybody knows Scotland's won the energy lottery twice. We have the highest overland wind speeds in Europe, which makes wind power just total natural. And I think it's great that the wind farms are springing up, but why can't they be made in Scotland? Why do we have to import these capital items? That supply chain should be embedded here. And I don't see what's insecure about a turbine blade. It's an inert object. It just spins round. And compared with a nuclear power plant, I mean, it just feels like a silly statement that there's a security concern about turbine blades. It makes no sense at all.
And so, Maureen, I understand that this was a decision made by the UK government, and as it is technically a reserved power. But do you think that the SNP would have any power to sort of revive these lost jobs in the Highlands? For example, there were 1,500 potential jobs created from this now defunct investment. So do you think the SNP has any power to bring any jobs to the Highlands economy?
Well, I cannot for the life of me think why Labour have stopped this when they're allowing a new embassy, as David said, to be built in the city of London, nearest our financial institutions. I mean, if that's allowed to go ahead, what is the rationale for stopping this? It just does not make sense. And I do not know why the media haven't picked up on this more. But there's a much bigger question here is the economies in the UK are going down because for decades now, big companies have wanted to offshore jobs because of cheaper labour in China and the Far East, because they weren't willing to pay workers in this country decent wages to make things. And here we have a chance to see a reversal of that, and we're not allowing it. Now, where's the logic in that? Where's the good government in that? There are lots of questions for the media to be asking Labour and the UK government, and to me, this just does not make sense. You know, I mean, on the oil boom, we allowed the US to come in without uh, any hindrance whatsoever. And yes, okay, this is China, but China is the second biggest economy in the world. Are we not going to do that because of the threat of spying or whatever? I mean, as my daughter says, we're all being looked at all the time anyway, so why do we worry about it? It's happening and we can't do anything about it. So surely if we're getting 1,500 jobs in the Highlands, I mean, that is a huge bonanza. And for Labour to turn it down, I really hope it's going to be a big item in the campaign during this election.
Yeah. I agree with everything Maureen said there, but it's worth drawing a link perhaps to the Grangemouth decision not to support the refinery and to allow it to close. I mean, it's just bizarre that we pump oil out of the ground in Scotland, but then we have to send it overseas and import the finished products. And that, there's a similar dynamic there with this turbine blade issue. It's just not right. We're being deindustrialized. And although I'm all in favour of the service economy, we should be making stuff here.
But do you think that this is because Labour actually see that independence is inevitable at one point and they want to make sure that people don't think we can survive by ourselves because they know blooming heck that we do, and they want to make it look as if Scotland's poor and has to rely on the rest of the UK, whereas we all know that it's actually the other way around, that they need our resources.
Yes, absolutely, I agree with that, Maureen. And within Believe in Scotland, we've lobbied the Scottish government quite hard, actually, on the JERS report, which is a self-harming piece of fiction.
Mm.
As a street campaigner, the 1 week of the year I don't go out on I definitely do not go out is the week when JERS is published, because the Scottish government tells us that we're too poor, and it's a work of fiction. And we would love to work with the Scottish government to create a new version of that shows how the sheer wealth of the Scottish economy. I know we don't feel wealthy, but that's because the wealth is flowing somewhere else. We need to show that and explain it.
I think the answer is that the Scottish government has always to balance its budget. So if there's a deficit on the JERS, it's obviously from the UK end.
Exactly.
And so, David, you are the Chief Steward of Believe in Scotland. So just for the sake of our audience, could you please explain what Believe in Scotland does and what it believes in? Oh, other than Scotland.
Well, Believe in Scotland is a network of approximately 140 yes groups and 140 local yes groups and 10 national groups. So, for example, NHS for yes, Women for Independence, Yes for EU. Those are example national groups. And simply put, we try to coordinate those groups campaigning for independence. We're very closely affiliated with Business for Scotland, who provide researched materials and publish leaflets, and we get those out to campaign groups and arrange regular regional and national campaign days, of which, of course, yesterday was a notable example with the March and Rally for Independence in Edinburgh yesterday.
Yes, so moving on to the March of Independence. So First Minister John Swinney and actor Brian Cox were among the speakers addressing thousands of people who marched in Edinburgh in support of Scottish independence yesterday. So, Maureen, with this very successful march, as we saw yesterday in Edinburgh, do you think this will impact voter turnout or, support for the SNP?
Well, obviously, I hope it will. I certainly think it made everybody. I mean, it was a lovely day. Thank goodness the rain stayed off, and everybody was in good spirits. And I think many of those people who were on the march will go back to their constituencies and continue campaigning. I think more. I hopefully after yesterday will see that we need to be campaigning on the ground in their constituencies and go out and help the local campaigning groups. So in that sense, it was great, and I think um, Believe in Scotland have to be congratulated on the march of yesterday. And it's absolutely right that these campaigning groups are coordinated and that Business for Scotland, provide a lot of the research, while the SNP campaign on the ground and have the organisation on the ground, and obviously are in government. And none of this march towards independence will happen if there's not an SNP government with a majority and in a position to negotiate. So I hope it has a positive effect. The polls are showing that the SNP are in the lead. I hate when we're in the lead this early on in a campaign. I don't want people to think that it's the SNP are a shoo-in. Everybody has to go out and vote. I worry about low turnouts. I know how out of date and how wrong the electoral voters are, where you get students who've moved away 3 or 4 years ago, 12 students in a flat when there should only be three. So with all that, I think we have to have a legitimacy of a high turnout in the election, and that's what worries me at the moment. As well as people thinking that it's in the bag for the SNP. So everybody has to go out and campaign as hard as they possibly can and get the vote out on the day for the SNP, both votes SNP, because I think as well as having 65 SNP MSPs, we have got to have a high regional vote as well, the majority in the regional vote to reaffirm that Scotland is really serious about wanting independence and a new referendum.
Yes. Thank you, Maureen. So, David, how do you think that the Believe in Scotland group can work with the SNP, if they plan to do so, to ensure not only greater turnout, but also a majority in the election?
Well, I have to say, Believe in Scotland is party politically neutral, right? We don't come out in favour of any political party, but we do advocate that Scottish people should vote for parties which are pro-independence and against parties which are unionist. So it's not a case that Believe in Scotland would ever campaign for the SNP or the Greens or the Scottish Socialist Party or the Alliance candidates. That just wouldn't happen. We are a very, very broad church. The only characteristic you need to be part of Believe in Scotland is a belief in independence. That said, I do agree with Maureen that it is critical that we have a yes Parliament after May the 7th. If we don't, I'm really not sure what the cause of independence does. So yes, people need to get out to vote. We're lucky in Scotland that we have an electoral system where every vote does count. It can make a difference. So get out there and vote. But more importantly, if you're pro-independence, now is the time to pick your party, go and visit their office, introduce yourself, sign up for going out leafleting or canvassing, if you're confident enough. It's going to be the next 5 weeks. It's about boots on the street, door knocking, door chapping, conversations on the doorstep, talking with people, persuading people how wealthy and influential in the world Scotland could be were we to be an independent nation, and then putting a pro-independent government into Holyrood.
And so, obviously not every local area or authority votes SNP. So how do you think, Maureen, the SNP can appeal to these areas that have historically not voted SNP?
Well, interestingly, I hope after May the 7th that there is going to be at least one hole in the wall of the blue wall along the border. I think that that is a real ability this time, which will be really good. Clearly, the SNP is going after every single constituency. We are the only party that really has good organisation throughout the whole country and has representation at the moment throughout the whole country. So I think the SNP is in good heart. It's had a rocky 5 years because of various things, but John Swinney has been the most amazing leader who's got the party back to a position of strength, a position of stability. Um, in a position of good heart, strong governance, strong finances. So I'm not too worried about that. I just hope that as many members will go out and be active in this campaign throughout the whole country. But I think David makes a good point that Believe in Scotland is an umbrella organisation that has managed since 2014 to keep alive the for independence in the NHS among farmers, all these organisations that belong to Believe in Scotland, so that's why the the percentage for independence is still very high. And imagine what it's going to be like going into a referendum
Yeah.
already with that high percentage for independence, because we lost so narrowly the last time and we weren't in that such good space as having so many of our population in favour of independence. And we've seen the mess that Stammer has made since 2024. Who would believe that a Labour Party would come into government and make such a mess? So the credibility of Westminster parties is really at rock bottom. And while it's not been easy to govern in Scotland, nobody likes managing austerity, which is what's happened. But as David said, with all the resources of Scotland in our own control, it could be so much better. And that's the message that has to be got over at this election.
Thank you. And so, David, are there any other campaigns or events hosted by Believe in Scotland that are coming up?
There's nothing in the diary at the minute. However, we do hold fairly regular regional campaign days, which is when we pick a town, a constituency, and we encourage activists to travel there and join the team. Excuse me. And have a campaign day, basically leafleting. So we split up into teams and try and leaflet every street. Those are great events, by the way. They're always morale boosting. And we also organise a couple of national campaign days a week where we do exactly the same, but we encourage people to do it locally. So to create simultaneous activity across Scotland. I'd encourage everybody to sign up. If you believe in independence, please go and visit Believe in Scotland and sign up. Even better, become a stakeholder member. It's only £5 a month, and keep an eye out for developments. Isla, would it be appropriate to talk a little bit about yesterday and how the day went?
Well, yes, that is our section at the moment. So yes, talking about the March for Independence, it's guest speakers, like, for example, Brian Cox and John Swinney, and the turnout? Anything about the march? Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so for people who don't know, this event was planned 15 months in advance, and with a deliberate purpose. We in Believe in Scotland wanted the Holyrood 2026 election campaign to start with a big bang pro-independence statement to put independence on the agenda for the election. Now, I think we've done that, but we had quite a troubled history in developing the event. So we'd originally had approval for this event to be held at the Parliament grounds. That approval was given in February of 2024, but it was withdrawn a few weeks ago, and we've had an absolute mad scramble to put in place something different. And out of the options, we chose to go for Carlton Hill. That in itself had challenges. We've had to organise buses for the disabled and people whose legs aren't capable of propelling them up that hill. And it's a challenge even for some of us younger ones. But we managed that. We were delighted by the turnout. I mean, the high street was rammed out. The counter demo was a pitiful something like 20 people. We absolutely swamped them. We were glad to have the support of Yes Bikers yesterday. We were very sad that unfortunately Gordon McIntyre Kemp was taken ill the night before, so was both unable to speak, but was also unable to help us organise. So I had to pick up Brian Cox from his hotel and get him to the march, as well as trying to organise the front of the march and so on. But we did it. We had nearly 100 volunteers, to whom I'm extremely grateful. I mean, it's always great to attend these events and enjoy the atmosphere and so on, but they don't happen without volunteers prepared to put on the high vis, attend the briefing, and then go and make things happen and keep people safe during the event and make it happen. So, a big thank you to the almost 100 volunteers who made yesterday happen. We couldn't have done it without you, and you did a brilliant job. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So while you were picking up Brian Cox, did you get his autograph?
No, I didn't. But we had an interesting conversation about Kevin Spacey.
Oh, right.
And if anybody's wondering, I'm no relative, and I understand that Spacey is actually a stage name. That it's actually his mother's maiden name. And,
I did not know that.
I won't say what Brian Cox said about that. That's a private conversation. But
Fair enough.
I would say though, I've come away with the learning that fame, extreme fame, such as Brian Cox has, is an absolute curse.
Oh yes,
Trying to get back in the car afterwards with a huge throng of people wanting autographs and selfies was a huge challenge, and the man took it with great forbearance and character. Was friendly to everybody, sent everybody away happy, but I couldn't do that. No thanks.
Of course, fair enough. So, Maureen, I believe you were in attendance at the march as well. Is that correct? Yes.
Yes, I was. Yeah, I was just marching in the throng. Yeah, sorry.
No, sorry. So, was there anything about that event that particularly stood out to you?
Well, as just the huge volume of people. I mean, I don't know what the official figures are saying, what the police were saying it was, but it was a huge amount of people. One of the biggest marches, if not the biggest march, I would say that I have been on. And there were lots of people that I saw there who just took the day off from canvassing and leafleting in their own constituencies to be there to meet friends they haven't seen for a while and just, as I say, get buoyed up for the rest of the campaign. And I think there's always a dilemma whether you go to this big rally or whether you stay and canvass locally. But I think, and so there could have been more if we weren't in an election time, but it was absolutely the best thing to do. As David has said, it's not run by the SNP, and I think I only saw a handful of SNP flags or SNP banners. It was mostly a sea of saltires. And it does show that, it's good that things are not run, not all independence things are run by the SNP. There is a much bigger, broad church. And, whereas I want everybody to vote SNP, I recognise other independence parties. But it was, great thanks to Believe in Scotland. And, one of the things I do in the doors when people say that they don't think we're strong enough to go for independence, I actually say, well, go and look up the Business for Scotland website. These are business people who have put together all the information that there is on the Business for Scotland website to show that we absolutely can be a prosperous independent country.
And so also yesterday was the March Against the Far Right in London. It was, I think, one of the greatest demonstrations in UK history. So do you think, despite Reform's popularity in some areas, that there is a shift away from the far right at this time? Or is it too early to say, do you think?
I think there are definitely cracks in Reform. We've seen how candidates only last 5 minutes. I think there's 5 now that have gone from their 73 in Scotland. However, there are people that are absolutely scunnered with having to live with high cost of living and not seeing any real rewards for their hard work for decades now, really since the 2008 crash. And even the projections are well into the 30s before we'll see people's living standards getting back to what they are. So, yeah, people are scunnered and fed up, and, we all get that. But what's the alternative? It's certainly not Reform, because they're only out, like Trump, to see more money go into the pockets of the rich. And unfortunately, harking back to the 30s, it's poor people who see them as an alternative. So there is a job of work for every right thing, every other party, to show that Reform, while everybody's scunnered, Reform isn't the answer. And the SNP are absolutely trying their best, with one hand tied behind their back, to do the best for the people in Scotland.
Thank you very much to...
I completely agree with what Maureen says there, but I'd also say that Westminster isn't the answer either, regardless of party. You have this insane system where we give all the powers of a medieval monarch to a prime minister who can command a majority in the Commons based on first past the post. It's just not a system designed to reflect the complexity of society. It's not designed to reach an accommodation between points of views. It's an oppositionalist system that just involves parties bashing each other rather than working to improve the lot of the rest of us.
Mm-hmm. So thank you very much, David Spacey and Maureen Watt from the SNP and Believe in Scotland. So that is it for this week's Full Scottish. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We can only exist with your support. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you, and thank you again to our guests, David and Maureen.
Thank you.